Hi everyone, and welcome to a real-time coloring video. Today it's all about how to color those scales, and this is part of the coloring challenge for Make It Crafty. We had a kind of internal in the Make It Crafty design team, an internal kind of challenge. We all got our own little deeper part of the challenge. The challenge is coloring animals and textures for animals, so maybe fur or feathers, or in my case scale. We all got our own. I got scales, so I did a couple of mermaids. You can see them over at my blog, and then I decided, well, for my part, my card, I'm going to make a dragon. I actually colored this image before. When it was released, I had the huge honor of actually making the packaging coloring for the rubber stamp, and I think I made a green dragon with these kind of scales that I'm going to show you today. By the way, there is a kind of mini giveaway on the companion video of this, so if you haven't seen the card making video, I will link it in the description down below and up in the corner, and you will have the opportunity, if you want to win the card that I end up making with this image. But that is on that video, so you have to head over to that video, and I will list the giveaway in the beginning of the video and all the details on how to enter. But yeah, so let's get into the coloring part. This is going to be a pretty long video, but the coloring videos always are, aren't they? So I'm probably gonna mix everything, but we're gonna start with the coloring here. So I knew I wanted to make scales, and I knew I wanted to make all of the details of the scales with my colored pencils, because it is kind of rough doing small teeny tiny details with your markers. And because of that, I knew that I needed to have a very good blended kind of base, and you can do all of this with pens, but it takes so much time if you have to do all of the layers in pencils. And this is something I actually learned from Bouquet, which is a Swedish YouTuber who been doing marker videos, like portrait videos, for so long. I followed her for years and years and years, and she was actually, I think, the reason why I've started looking at markers, because I found her blog and her videos on she used Tria markers when she started. She mostly actually don't use markers as the bottom anymore. She has upgraded, but she used to do either just completely markers or markers with layers of pencil. So that was how I got introduced to this, and then I've seen it in so many different places and so many different creators who does it. But it's a very easy way, if you do have both your markers and your pencils, it's an easy way to get that base layer down in a more quick fashion, and then add the pencil work on top. However, this also depends on kind of the paper you use. I use the Make It Crafty blending cardstock, which is awesome for markers, but it's a little bit slick, so you can't really add loads of layers of pencils. You can maybe make one or two. You can probably get more layers also, but you don't have that much tooth to work with. However, adding little details and not trying to blend the whole image on top of it, it's awesome for. And I love it to do any kind of Copic work, because things blend awesomely on it, but it also gives me the opportunity to get a lot more detail. And I've tried multiple papers, and you can go for like Nina papers that are more porous, things blend beautifully on it. However, it can start to bleed, and you can't get as much details, because when you put out that line, it will kind of spread a little because of the more porous surface. I also used papers on the other direction, like the MFT coloring card, no line coloring cardstock, where you can get a perfect layer. Like if you want to use just one color, you can get a perfect layer, and if you want to work with kind of cell shading, perfect again. However, blending on it isn't that easy, and you can get super fine details, but again, blending things are a little bit harder. So you have to choose the paper that works for you. And I love this. However, when I know that I'm going to work a lot more with pencils, when I'm really just having a very, very basic layer of colors from the markers, so that I'm not working on a white surface, then I go for something like a Nina, or mostly Ninas actually, because they have a little bit more tooth, which makes pencil work much easier. And then you can go even further, and you can start using watercolor cardstocks and use watercolors as your base. They are beautiful. I think her name is Kendall. She is a American. She does like food and fruits and stuff, and she does watercolor with pencil, and it's beautiful. I really want to learn how to work like her, but right now marker and pencils is my thing, so that is what I'm doing. So for the coloring, I chose to go with a couple of different orange colors. I have purposely not gone with any kind of really bright oranges or really bright yellows. I wanted it to be a little bit more muted, because the pencil work would work a little bit better, and also because I'm kind of comfortable in my muted colors right now, and I haven't used those markers. I usually use a lot of browns and then a pop of very bright, but that means that my muted colors hasn't really gotten to be used. So I'm trying to use all my markers so the rest of them doesn't feel left out or something. So I started off actually with a purple tone. I used a V12 as my shadow. It's a pretty light purple, but when you layer the kind of yellowy orange, I think YG15 is my darkest for the body of the dragon. It actually kind of just mutes it, makes it a little bit darker and mutes it, but it's not that super contrast, but it does give a lot of dimension, even though it's not that super contrast, and I'm enjoying it. Because of the purple, when you look at how something is natural shaded, if you look at something that is yellow or orange, and you look how a shadow is cast on it, you will see that that area that is in the shadow will have a bluish or purplish tone. And for colors that have yellow in them, yellow orange in them, this kind of violet to bluish violet tones are really good. So I did swatch this. I swatched it on the same kind of paper, just scrap of the same kind of paper, so that I had the opportunity to look how different things affected each other. Also waited for it to dry to see that the blends actually was as good as I wanted them to be. So I'm used a V12 for the lighter yellow, and then I'm using a V15 for the deeper, darker reddish oranges that the little pointy things scale. not scales, something, the pointy things that I have on head and on the back, and also the wings and the claws on the paws, kind of. I'm using the deeper, darker reds. I'm actually not coloring the fire, which you will kind of see, and that is because I'm not using the fire. I'm using a cardboard piece for the sentiment, and it has the end of the hello, I think it says hello friend, and hello beautiful is what it said, and the little end kind of whoopy thingy on the O makes looks like he's kind of spraying out the hello beautiful out like the fire. So kind of the idea. And also I so not good at coloring fire. Fire is not my thing, so I need to practice it, but I just didn't want to this time around. So I just decided, well, I go for the kind of fiery color for the dragon, and then I use a sentiment for the fire. So I'm going very monochromatic with the dragon and the sentiment, and then I had a bluish grey background for where I placed it on for the card base. But this is just coloring. When I'm putting down shadows like I'm doing here, I go first in with my shadow. If I'm a little bit hesitant on where to put things, I would go in with my absolute lightest color first, put down the shadows how I want them to look, see if it kind of looks the way I want to. If it does, I will then go in with my darkest and go from darkest to lightest. But like this time around, I have colored this before, I had ideas already how to add all the kind of shadows, so I just went in with my darkest color, which is the shadow, which was B12 for the yellow part or yellow orange parts, and the red orange parts are B15. Then I'm going in with YR18. YR18 is again one of these muted oranges. It's beautiful to work with when you work with redheads. It's one of my go-to colors to I think next to lightest color when I do redheads, because it has this kind of brownish undertone. And then I'm going in with YR07. And YR07 is actually pretty bright orange, but it's on the darker scale of the bright oranges. So I'm going with that for the lightest parts of the whole thing. And when I'm picking colors, I'm doing that based on more natural colors. You can, for a simpler and more, like, you can use kind of the gradient colors from one color. It will make the image look a little bit flatter. But like, for example, if you want to do mid-tone YO7, then you can do a YO9 as your darkest and a YO4 for your lightest or something like that. But I like to mix and match. So what I do is I use the highlight color that I'm going to use for the design. I usually pick the mid color first, and that is kind of the base color, what I'm after for. This is, if I just would color it one color, this would be it. And I usually pick that color in between the ones that have starts with a 1 or a 2 or a 3 as the kind of the color, and then I try to pick a mid-tone, so it's gonna end on something between a 4 and a 7. Usually, it all depends. If I'm going darker, I would shift that, and if I'm going for a more muted, I will also shift the first number. But when it comes to the darker colors, I would go the first number, I would step up. So if I'm choosing, for example, as in this case, the mid-tone is 18, so then the lighter tone is a 07. So it is, the lighter tone is 07, the darker tone is actually purple. So that kind of doesn't really make sense in that case because I'm using the purple. But usually I have 4 colors when I do it. But yeah. So this is how it looks when it's kind of finished. And you can end it like this. This is a perfectly finished blended thing. But we're going for scales today. So now I'm doing the scales. And I'm coming back to the colors soon. But the scales here, I'm using a Polychromos pencil. And you can use any kind of colored pencils. What you want to think about is that if you go, for example, for Primacolor pencils, they are a lot creamier. They can be harder to get a very sharp pen with. And you do want to have a very sharp pen. I'm trying to figure out what the bit in the front is. The word in the front, and I can't really figure it out. So you want a sharp pen when you're doing this kind of scaling. Basically, the whole scaling is just making teeny tiny circles, and I do them like here. I'm going around the eye because usually dragons have them around the eye, but I'm also doing them in kind of circular motions because it is a circular head. So I'm trying to place the circles in lines that would fit with how the shape of the head. So with the ears later on, I will kind of do them in that triangle shape, just to make it look like they are following the shape and not just stripes. That would also help it make it look a little bit more dimensional. So the shading will make it look dimensional, but also how I place the circle will make it look dimensional. So and the other tip of this is that you will see here that I'm not going all the way out to the edge on the first kind of round of circles, and this is because by leaving that little edge that is a little bit smaller than the width of the circles, then I have to kind of cramp them in there, and when you cramp them in there, it will look like they actually are wrapping around the little dragon, or the side of the head on the dragon, while if I would just put the circles just close to the edge the first time and then just add the circles on top, you won't have that cramping effect or the elongating of the circles, and it will look less dimensional, and it will look less like the dragon continues on where you not see it. So yeah. So now we're going to continue watching me making teeny tiny circles, and we're going to go back to the coloring. So as I said, it was a little bit of a bad example with the darker tones. So let's go for the lighter tones and talk about them to kind of do the example. I'm using a Y17, a Y38, and a YR15. And when you, again, I'm jumping between color families when I'm doing my blends, which I often do. But then this kind of idea of, well, I would go a darker shade here doesn't always works, because you want to kind of figure out what color will show through if you layer them on top of each other. If you just go for yellows and you want some dimension just going for yellows, I would go for always changing both numbers, basically. So when you go for the mid-tone, I would go with something that is in the middle, like a 30 I have a 38 as the darkest here because the yellow 38 isn't that deep. It's a little bit more just orange. And then for the lighter color, I have a 17. So you hear that it's 2 steps lighter on the first number and 1 step lighter on the second number. So 17 up to 38. And when I'm going for my darker color here, the shade, I could go for a, I don't think there are any more. Yeah, I would go, if there were any more yellows, I would go for 40 or 50. But I don't think we have 40s and 50s in yellows. I could also go for the 26 and 29 because they are more towards the grayish spectrum. Or I can jump color family. And in this case, I wanted the shadows to be a little bit more reddish and not towards the green spectrum. Because I already have orange tones from the yellows. By going for the green spectrum, I would make mud. Because the red and the green together will kind of make a little bit of mud. So I'm going towards the redder spectrum instead. And I'm doing that by going with a YR15, which is, could have been lighter. But if you actually swatch them, you will see that the YR15 is actually darker than the 38. The 8 is kind of the amount of pigment. The last number is the amount of pigment you have in it. So a lighter number will have less pigment and therefore look lighter, while a darker color will have darker pigment, more pigment, and therefore it will look darker. The first number is more on the grayscale of tones, so a smaller number will make it be very, very bright, and the bigger the number is, the less bright it is. It doesn't work for all the pens, and therefore I do recommend having a colored chart, a chart that you color up yourself to kind of pick your colors. And I do recommend the Sandy Alnock hex chart. It is, I think, like $5 or $6, something around there. It's not expensive and it's super awesome. You print it on the same cardstock that you color on so that you get the real colors. And then you pick your colors from that. But I try to kind of mix and match overall, and I'm even putting purple in here. And purple is one of those colors. First of all, I'm using very light purples. If you take that purple and color it on top of your dark oranges, because the lighter purple will have more of the kind of blending solution, it has less pigment and therefore more of the blending solution, you actually can get a texture, and it might be an unwanted texture. So when doing that kind of purple shadows, you want to put your purples down first. I know that the blue purple tone will show up amazingly and beautifully underneath a layer of yellow and orange. I did try the lighter purple with the deeper colors, and that didn't work because it was too light and it didn't really make that much of a change. But going for then the V15 made it a darker color and then it actually showed up. And if I hadn't seen the contrast that I wanted there, I would have gone even darker and so on. And this is why swatching is very important. I usually, when I was younger, I did a lot of looking at how other people had picked colors and used their colors, which is an awesome way to start, and I do recommend it. Look how other people use colors and figure out, try them out, and you learn. By trying other people's combinations, you will learn which combination you like and how the different combination will work with your way of coloring. But lately, when I've been doing these kinds of colorings, I'm more looking for images with different colors. I Google for dragons, or Google for fire or sea, or whatever color combination I'm looking at. If I can't really figure it out on my own, I Google for the images and the colors, and then I look at my hex chart and I go through like, these color looks about what I want, and then I layer them on, like sample them and layer them and see if they actually do end up giving me the result that I want. And I do believe that by doing this, some colors I already know how they work, so I can do this without having to swatch them every time. But I do try to swatch as much as possible, because that will give a better look. So I'm finished. I've done all of my little circles. It took me some time, and now I'm going in and adding some highlights. So the highlights, I'm using a cream pen. The specific pens are listed in the description down below, and all, both for the markers and for the pencils. I use Polychromos. As I said earlier, they are easier to sharp to a very, very thin point, so it's easier to make very detailed. But also what I like with them is that they aren't as opaque as the other pens, like the Prismacolor pencils. The Prismacolor pencils are a little bit more opaque, so then you will really see it. Here I'm just adding like a thin layer of cream on top. It's not so everything, you can see everything underneath, and that is harder to do. It is able to do it, but it's harder to do it with the Prismacolor pencils, because they do have a lot more creaminess in them. They're more wax based. Here I'm instead, if I want something to be brighter or to be more opaque, I just add a second layer or a third layer. And I really like working that way, and that is why I really like working with my Polychromos pencils. So I used some cream. I added some cream to the eye. I actually added some red tones to the eye also, all just to give it a little bit more depth and definition. And the highlights is because I wanted to have some highlights on top of my little scales, so that where I had the brightest highlights, or the scaling would be a little bit easier too. So here's the kind of finished close-up of my dragon. I want to say thank you so much for watching. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching all the way here. If you like my video, please thumbs it up. If you have any questions, comment down below. Please share it with your friends, and if you want to see more like this, just hit that subscribe button. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye!